what I'm just going to talk a little bit about my engagement along the conversation about racial equity, anti-racism, etc. And again, we're going to talk about my first encounter of really this topic happened when I was a kid growing up in church. And the one passage that I think about that kind of sets this conversation up is John 15:12-13. And it just says the following: my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. So when I was growing up, I was actually confused that I didn't see this example in church and in life as a kid. I grew up in a very segregated town along many lines. What I saw as a young kid was that the church was divided, by race. Literally, there was both a line through the middle of the town that I grew up in where white people was on one side and black people was on the other side. And that would be bad enough. But then also in the town, there were all of these various faith communities that were not connected, but rather saw itself as being divided. And in church, I actually heard and felt a message of inclusion as opposed to inclusion. So as a kid, I was just confused by what I saw and what I felt in church about all of these lines of disconnect, all of these lines of exclusion. And I actually wondered, where am I going to find this expression of God's love and of the kind of community that I see in the Word, that I see in what the promise of God is. And then I had a bit of a taste of reconciliation. It was well after the time that I was an adult, and I found a faith-based organization. That organization, as Pastor Peter said earlier, was Isaiah. And for the first time, I really felt a genuine relationship coming from a person who was an organizer, who was reaching out to me in relationship, who happened to be a white woman, but didn't come to me because she wanted to get something, extract something from me. She really wanted a genuine relationship. And in her and in this organization, I was invested in by the organization. And then the organization also received my investment back into it. And I wonder if there's anybody who's in this adult forum has actually experienced both of those things as they tried to reach across race, get to know some of the culture. Have you actually felt like the person, the group on the other side, both invested in you and allowed you to invest right back into them or right back into that culture as well? Not a rhetorical question, by the way.
I see some people nodding. So you can raise your hand if you want to. John?
Yeah, I could tell you I had a lot of confusion when I grew up too. I grew up in a Catholic church, and it was maybe a little on the progressive side. I remember as a 7-year-old in 1956 being told you never use the N-word. That is, you never use the N-word, and nuns would never allow you to do it. But at the same time, my first shot about what is supremacy wasn't about racial supremacy. It was about religious supremacy. That Christians were the only ones going to go to heaven. And by the way, Catholics had the inside track on how to do that.
Yeah, that is in many ways the same kind of story that I grew up with and that I felt as well. I'm wondering if there's somebody else on the call who's had maybe a similar experience of trying to reach across lines of race and lines of division. And in reaching, you both felt an investment from the community toward who you were reaching, and also felt felt like you could invest as well.
Sharon, you want to say something?
Yes. For part of my teaching career, I taught in Guatemala, which unfortunately has been in the news recently. But I taught in a mixed race population, and that was a joy to me. And I experienced both things. I had people of color that invested in me, and I could invest in them, if those are the terms you want to use. But we felt kinship. And then there were some who did not accept me, this old white woman. So I had experienced both of those. But that was some of the most important things in my life, to be able to be a part of that community and experience the give and take from people of more than one color.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So one of the first things that I did when I joined this organization was I started a table to talk about race. And I really just had one rule about the conversation that I wanted everyone to extend the graciousness in. And that rule was to stay at the table. So no matter what came up, no matter what offenses happened, no matter how courageous someone expressed, their voice, their understanding of how courageous some other person was and how that was received on the other side, I asked people to be willing to stay at the table. We had people at that table really reflecting the entirety of those who were in the organization. At that time, those were people who were Latinos, those who were people who were of African descent. Those were white people, and male and female at the time were at the organization and also in these conversations. And I guess I had two rules. One, the other rules were we could talk about anything. And we had an expectation that people would come and be honest, transparent about the biases that they grew up with and the biases that they currently held, to be able to listen and hear each other, to work through that, and to stay at the table. Everybody, including me, recognized that I didn't have a clue what I was doing or how to do it well. It was a genuine risk to really set up a conversation that was honest, where we could see who we are, and then hopefully connect in that conversation with our faith, with the hope that we wanted God to embody us with, the hope for God and truly the hope for each other. In that experience and doing that and setting it up and having that conversation, out of that conversation, we really started growing into a multi-organization conversation. What I mean by that, my small table of people, which was probably about 15 to 20 people, spread beyond that small conversation to the organization, through the organization, and through other organizations as well. And through that multi-organization and having some really good people who had tackled this conversation around race and racism previously, we started talking about interpersonal and structural racism. And when we talked about interpersonal and structural relationship, we both talked about, me and someone else from another community, and also how racism is at work in all of our systems. In those conversations, one of the things that we discovered was the difference between good policies and good outcomes. At the time, one of the things that we looked at was there was a policy to actually bring good jobs, good works in community, bring those jobs to communities that were previously marginalized. That's what the policy said. But communities and structures were not set up to deliver on those good policies. And so we started looking at those policies and trying to figure out how could we turn a good policy also into a good outcome. I'll tell you a little bit about a case, a specific case that I worked in, and then I'll ask for some more comments. We were working with Minnesota Department of Transportation, and one of those very small policies actually gave permission to states, to whomever, to take like 0.5% of all of the federal dollars to use it to train and sustain minority workers and minority companies as well. The problem with that good policy is that we hadn't figured out how to use the policy to deliver on good outcomes. And so we worked on two things. One, what are the metrics that we look at, right? At the time, the only metric for connecting with good companies and good people was that, in letting the project, and that's kind of what it was called, the only thing you had to do was send a fax overnight before a project was let. Not too good, right? So we developed different metrics so that we could see where the need was and also see how to deliver on the need. So we looked at where the real opportunities were. I wonder, you don't have to think about MnDOT, and you don't have to think about that example, but I wonder if you've ever intended to do good to a community maybe that you didn't know anything about. Your intentions were to do good, but yet in your practice of your intentions, maybe you experienced some failure. Anybody ever tried to do good to another community and it actually didn't go off too well? You can come off of mute if you want to.
Well, I sometimes think about it from the perspective of we always want to go in and fix things. And, there's a couple people on today that have been to Tanzania, and my husband's been there frequently with the water project. And the conversation always comes back to, I don't know if we're really doing what we need to do. That time and time again, we go in and we think we're going to just fix it and it's all going to be fine without the connection. And I think we've learned that the connection with the people in the community and basically supporting them rather than being in charge makes a big difference. And it's a real challenge to step back and ask, what do you want from us? What would you like us to do? As opposed to, here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Penny.
Yeah, that really is a powerful, powerful call from God to all of us, right? That rather than us go in trying to fix a problem, to start at the point of relationship. That is extremely challenging when it comes to dealing with issues about race. Because, I know I feel ill-equipped when trying to bridge that huge divide, because it's mostly about relationships. It's mostly about being grounded in our faith. It's mostly about stopping to really see those whom we call the other. To see the person, not just the need. To look beyond, our own unique set of values and biases and stop for a while to actually look into, to be with those we see as the other. It's the most challenging thing about race, because it's not about, when I have a plumbing problem, I call the plumber and the plumber just fixes it, right? It's not a real relationship on the other side of my pipes. There is a real relationship when we think about communities that are marginalized. Really, when we think about us.
So I have a question for you on that.
Yes.
So we live in this society where we like things to go fast.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we want it done yesterday. And so people get frustrated because, you know, well, this is going to take too long. Can't we just, you know, write a check, do something and move on? How do we get through that thought process and that action to developing those relationships? And do we miss the fact that if we develop the relationship, we might not have to work as hard at the other things because it's going to be a team rather than individual?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have these kinds of conversations all the time. And what I always say is we can write a check. We can't just write a check, though. Right? We can feed, you know, the hungry, but we can't just feed the hungry. No, I actually like us to think about it as our relationship with God. You know, it's not just about us, you know, coming to church. It's about really getting to know God and letting God get to know us. It's the same kind of relationship when we think about the place of race and increasingly learning how to practice, how to, you know, have anti-racist practices. It's not a quick fix. No, it's not as simple as, you know, a lot of us like to make it, you know, in these days, in these conversations. It's not as simple as being an ally and following, you know, whoever happens to be the leader of color for the day or for tomorrow or for next week or next month. I'd love it to be that simple. I really would. Unfortunately, it just isn't. When we think about becoming, you know, in my language previously, becoming multicultural, it's not just something where we, you know, we gather all of the various cultures in a room together, you know. And, you know, if you've listened to us in some of our language in the past, when we talk about 11 o'clock at church, or what time did we start today, Pastor Peter? 9 o'clock. the 9 o'clock hour at church is the most segregated hour of the day. It's not just that simple. And where, you know, we create a time when we look out in our communities, in our church, in our worship service, in our adult forums, and we see everything there, you know, in those seats. It actually is not just about that. It's about something far deeper. When we stop for a moment and we pay attention, yes, to the various colors reflected in all of our communities, but we look deeper and take the time to notice those cultures, to pay attention to those values, to understand what each ethnicity brings with them. And rather than value or judge right or wrong, we just receive. We create room and space in our heart and our life for every value, every person, every identity, every culture to be affirmed, yes, but more than being affirmed, to be powerful in our midst. One of the reasons it's so challenging is because we've been taught to focus on what we have to give up for that to happen. You know, well, what am I going to give up to? You know, we were talking about time a minute ago, right? How much time is it going to take for that to happen? Because I have an appointment that starts, in about 2 hours from now. And I need to make sure that it's done by then. What are the challenges that you think about when it comes to building deep relationships across race and across culture? What are those challenges?
So it sounds like you're talking about the difference between the theology of scarcity versus the theology of abundance.
That's one. That's certainly one expression.
Anybody else have any thoughts that they'd like to share?
Well,
You can
this
also
is-
put questions in the chat if you don't want.
I've got something. I've been struggling with this, and I know I have experience with various cultures, but not enough to act like I know I'm any authority, to speak to it, to what we're dealing with. And I've been listening to all kinds of things, both all across a political spectrum, and I think it's left me kind of confused, actually. But what comes out of that are a couple of things. One was a progressive program that recently said, well, we've learned that just raising the minimum wage to $15 does a lot more to help people and empower them than a lot of these other things where we're giving, but we're not empowering. And that's one. And then the other thing is I'm struggling with the, and I suppose that's because I've been a victim myself. So I know what it's like to have been a victim of something horrible. But I'm not a person of color, but sometimes I worry that convincing people that they're all victims instead of giving them the tools to empower themselves, there's something that seems like it would be more productive to give people the tools or even, like the raise in wage. And that's the second thing. I don't quite know how to resolve that because there's so many programs we have done that don't seem to be effective at the end of the day. I mean, they're with good intentions. I guess I'll stop there for now and see. Do you have any comments?
You said something extremely powerful, and I want to make sure you heard yourself. You said you had been a victim. And so don't worry about convincing someone else that, we're all victims. We are, but let's not worry about convincing others of that. If you've been a victim, you know what you most want and probably most need in that time. Right. You do. And if you can think about and just connect with what you most need, you can also understand what someone else most need, whether, whatever the condition and victimization is, and whether that's about joblessness or homelessness or, many of the other things that we list, when we think about marginalization. Whether you've been a person of color or not, you've certainly been a person of need. And sometimes in our conversations today, we forget about that aspect of, our common experience. And we forget about that aspect of kindness and compassion that we most want. We don't want someone to judge whether or not we're worthy or not. At least I don't when I'm in the place of need. I just want somebody to care about me enough, to see me enough, where they extend whatever form of help and assistance that I'm in need of at the time. Not to call me a victim, not to try to put me on some picture of those who are most in need of help, but just to extend the help. That's our point of connection. Not the complicated aspect of getting to know everything about race and racism, but the care enough to be human with someone else and to make that connection. That probably is the biggest piece of humanness that we need to bring to any conversation. And if we have that kind of humility, that we bring that into the conversation, we're better equipped to get to know whoever that other person in those other communities are. Go ahead.
So what do you see as some of the biggest hurdles for getting in our way of what you just said, caring enough to be human and to make the connection? What is getting in our way?
I think the biggest thing that all of us face is we have a fear of doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. And that fear frequently is crippling. When I talk about the table that we created, when I talk about the many organizations coming together in a conversation about race, racism, and structuralized systemic racism, the single biggest thing that interrupted, that slowed those conversations was the extreme fear faced that we just say the wrong thing. We just do the wrong thing. And what I try to tell people, and yes, this is simple, but what I try to tell people is realize, no, this isn't the first time that we were going to mess up or have messed up. We've actually made mistakes in the past. We've done the wrong thing in the past to people that we love, with people that we love. We've messed up before. Get over ourselves. We're going to mess up again. The beautiful thing about our relationship that we want to be genuine about is that we also know that as we've messed up in the past, when there's been a relationship there, we've been able to repair them, right? Sometimes it's as simple as, I'm sorry, I messed up. Tell me how I can do better. Sometimes it's complicated. We've done complicated before. I say to my coworkers, a lot of times when we're facing some difficult things that we have to do, we've done hard things before. Some seemingly that we were incapable of doing, but we've done them. We can have a conversation. We can build relationships across race, though challenging, though crippled by fear, though we certainly are going to say something wrong and do something wrong. We have some experience that we can draw on that when we do something or say something wrong, there's a lot of room that we have to repair those wrong actions if we enter the relationship with our faith, grounded in our faith, grounded in the fact that we're walking with people in a relationship, not just an action, but a relationship of love. And we deeply care about everybody and want everybody to thrive.
Pastor Peter, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I think that question of repair is really important to me, and I'm kind of curious about your thoughts in terms of the kind of structural repair that might be needed. That might be one of the obstacles that's getting in the way of us having more progress. I think in terms of anti-racist policies is structural repair. That the relationship is harmed in such a way, I think, particularly between white folks and people of color, and that there are some elements. And I think, Rachel, you brought up some of the trauma that's still embedded in a lot of this. But are there elements of structural repair that you think we need to be more mindful of or doing?
Absolutely. And you'll have to bring me back because I can't finish this part. One, and really,
you are always welcome back. You are always welcome.
Let's think about the narratives that we've painted for ourselves, the corners that we've painted ourselves in. There are two kinds of people. If you listen to our narratives, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are white people, and then there are people of color. White people are all bad. I mean, really, that's what our narratives say, right? That white people have constructed the horrible world that we're in, and people of color are, the folks upon whom the horror has been constructed. The problem with that is that there is no room for reality in such a picture. When I think about whiteness in terms of structure, I don't think about white people. I think about how our structures are grounded in whiteness, and whiteness has a particular model that's not real, but nonetheless has an impact on everything that we do and how all of us experience life. And so I'll tell you my motto. You can throw things at me, especially since I'm on Zoom. They won't hit me anyway. There we go. So the motto that I think is existing in the United States of America is not just a white person, but it is a white male who is heterosexual, who has multinational power, right? A multinational reach. I actually think that that is the model of whiteness, that is the model against which everything else, every other reality, every other being is measured against. And then in descending order, you know, there are folks all along the continuum who are at some point of need, who are not automatically, said that this is the model and this is the person that we're going to give the raises to first, that we're going to give the biggest salaries, that we're going to listen to and trust whatever they say, that we're not going to judge right or wrong because they're always right. Okay, so all of that stuff. So again, you have to come back. So that's one piece of the structure. At the other end of the structure are those, so I'd say are people who look like me. Okay, you can argue that point later too, right? Throw something again. So at the other end of the structure is someone who's Black, but not male. No, I want to think it's a Black male, but it's not a Black male. The other end of that structure is a Black female who has children, who can't find the time nor the space to work the job that she's actually qualified to work, because that Black female has to care for their children, right? So those are the two models. And so how do they pay for daycare? How do they show up? How do they go to, I mean, all of these other questions. That's the model at the other end of the spectrum. Well, where's everybody else? I mean, if we're really looking at structure, really, where is everyone else along the structure, and how do we think about them? How do we think about pay equity in that kind of structure? And what does right look like? I dare you to describe a perfect picture of right and right sizing this implicitly biased structure that we have. It's not the image that we've painted for ourselves. That is a confusing and inadequate image of where we are today. And we have no path that we can get there in this structure. The reason that we don't have a path is because the other thing that we say in this structure is follow the Black people. At least that's what we're saying right now, right? So again, you have to bring me back because I'm saying some stuff that I wouldn't otherwise say, but you asked me the question because I don't have time to talk about it. The problem with following all of the people of color is that there are many conversations, there are many right things that all of these voices are telling us to follow, and we can't follow all of them at any one moment. See how complicated that structure is? See how inadequate our language is for that kind of structure. I'm not going to answer it and have the conversation because I don't have time to have the conversation. But I just wanted you to see how complicated this conversation around race is when we choose to really have it. So I'll give you a phrase and then I'll let somebody say, whoever was trying to say something. Let me give you a phrase that I think. So one of the things that's happened, the legislator has declared racism a public health crisis. That's good. What's missing is we don't have a public health response to the public health crisis. That's a little tease. That's not an answer. Does somebody want to say something real quick before I think I'm wrapping it up in 6 minutes?
Okay, John, you have a comment real quick.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier your strategy at this table was stay at the table, and I have a feeling a lot of neat things happen when you stay at the table. You develop a real, genuine relationship. I don't think you can develop a relationship by talking points or programs. You've got to get to know people. And once you know them, making a mistake at what you're saying to them isn't so catastrophic. It's not unlike any relationship you have. You're on pins and needles the first time you talk. You want to impress them. But eventually you get to know the person and you can actually talk about little things like relationships. Probably the biggest single word you've talked about today is relationships. I don't see us having many relationships between black people and white people. You could say it's structural. We live in Stillwater is a very white community. There's things we could do, but will we ever be able to understand each other and really be truthful and trust each other if we don't know each other except by our talking points? And I've been saying this for a long time. If you go to our church on Sunday, you're not going to see too many black people, and there are many communities not 30 miles from here where we could start to understand each other. And once you get past that, you actually can develop real relationships. But it takes a little bit of time, and it's got to be there's no substitute for actually knowing somebody. Telling them your beliefs in the Constitution or certain rules, that's fodder. That's bullshit. Pardon my French.
So let me ask something real quick, since I have 4 minutes. Let me ask something real quick. You've talked about trust and trusting across relationship. Really, I like to meddle, so I want to meddle a little bit before I go. Do we, even though Stillwater's predominantly white and your church is predominantly white and all of that, I would really like to know, do we have that kind of trust even in your congregation to people that you don't normally hang out with? Is that trust really deep enough? Do we know enough about each other there? I'm gonna run through. It's a question that I don't want an answer to because you don't have time to give me an answer to it. So in everything that I've talked about, the importance of a relationship, we have to talk about sustaining our commitments in those relationships. No matter what happens, no matter how many times we run against something that we're uncomfortable. We have to see our faith as being responsible for dismantling the destructive force of racism, and then ask the question, for whom is racism a destructive force? Normally, a image comes up for us. My suggestion is that it's destructive for us all, if we are indeed people of God. What does our faith have to say about racism in the world and even in the church? And this the church's fight. Those are questions that we have to ask. My hope is we ask that and many other questions through and with our faith. We ask if this is our fight, if this is our cause, because Christ has called us to it. And then if it is, the only response is to answer it with faith, not with the lens that, and there are a bunch of lenses out there, not with the lens of the world, but the lens of God, which is, I suggest, it's a deeper call, because it calls our whole selves into this, and it calls us to sustain it, not just for the moment that is popular, but beyond the moment that is popular. I think I have 2 minutes left, so my time is probably about up.
Any other quick questions or comments? You have given us a tremendous amount to think about. That question you asked about, is the trust deep enough even within our Trinity family to have these conversations, was a real good one. Because I think that it's gotten so easy for us to all group with the people that have the same thoughts and ideas that we forget that there's a lot more diversity within our community as far as where everyone is about all sorts of things or what their needs are. You know, we put on a front when we get together, you know, for when we used to be able to get together in person, you know, everyone brings their best foot forward and their smiling faces. And then you start mentioning something and you find out everyone has their struggles and their challenges. And do we have that feeling of trust and safety to be able to share that without feeling as though someone's going to judge?
Yeah.
That's a really, really great question. Pastor Peter.
Well, and I do just want to say too, I think that having, you know, special guests like Pastor Paul are no substitute for the work that we have to do and that I
Right.
think we are engaging with together as a community beyond just this adult forum. And I know we're, you know, this is just one microcosm of, I think, like you're saying, so much of the diversity of our own conversations and the relationships that we need to be attending to. And I think some of that is happening, but that there's no substitute for our role and our work in that. And I think really to get at that point that you're talking about, like, you know, how does our faith really help us to dismantle the destructive forces of racism and other isms that we've been called by Christ to commit to.
Well, thank you for having me in this conversation. I've only skimmed the surface.
We will have you
Well,
back. We will have you back.
Thank you so much. This was
Yeah, both
absolutely
for-
wonderful. Loved having you here for speaking during church today. That was amazing. And
Thank you.
just for you to be willing to have this conversation with us, it really has given us a great deal to continue conversation on and to think about. And you've been just a blessing today for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being in conversation with you. I'd love to continue that conversation because there's nothing that I love more than being challenged by this great subject and knowing that through our faith collectively, you know, we can not only experience the challenge, but we can also experience some great success and depth of relationship.
Thank you so much. Next week, folks, we're going to start our study on Advent.